We're talking today about womanism, feminism, technology, some social justice, and actually looking at how techno-womanism can be used as a theoretical framework for looking at social movements and those kinds of things that happen online. So I'm Dr. Xeturah Woodley. My areas of research are really around culturally responsive teaching and learning. I do that in an online environment, and I teach my students about how technology can be used in liberatory ways. And so most of what I teach is really from a space of strengths-based teaching rather than focusing on deficit models of teaching and learning, especially when it comes to issues of gender and race. Shamika?
Yes. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for your patience. My name is Shamika Goddard. I am interested in technology, ethics, and social justice work, and studied this in seminary and wanted to continue working on these issues in this space. So I'm really excited to share this with you all, as this is the first opportunity I've had to do so publicly.
Yeah. So Shamika, I actually met her on YouTube, right? So she has a YouTube channel where she was talking about her thesis, her master's thesis, and you know how you go through YouTube and you watch videos and then it makes recommendations for you? Her video was one of the recommendations for me. So after I watched it, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm talking about techno-womanism. Oh, this is lovely. She called them thesis drippings. And so I wrote to her, I found her, wrote to her and said, hey, I think that we should start working together, do some writing around techno-womanism. And we did. And so this is the first presentation from that. And this is our first time meeting face-to-face. So over the last 2 years, what we've been doing is writing via Google Docs, talking on Skype, all of those kinds of things, and she's entering a doctoral program, which I just am so excited about. So she's entering a doctoral program, so partnership has worked. All right, so now let me talk with you about womanism. So I'm just going to introduce the concept of what womanism is. So womanism, according to Alice Walker, she coined the phrase 1983, womanist is to feminist as purple is to lavender. So a womanist then is someone who creates a space that puts women and women's issues at the center of analysis. So a womanist scholar is one who focuses on the wholeness of beings, both male and female, has women know the values and validates who women are, and puts them as the center of analysis rather than keeping us in the margin. We now center who we are. And there's a spiritual element to womanism. That's how we define womanism. So womanist is to feminist as purple is the lavender. And here are a few of the books that you can look up if you want to learn a little bit more about womanism. But womanism is the foundation of who we be as technologists. So we center ourselves in womanism. I also center myself in critical race theory. And so we pull from that languaging of things as we start talking about and teaching about using technology in classrooms. A couple of places you can find a little bit more information about womanism. Gifts of Virtue, Alice Walker and the Womanist Ethics is a good source. Black Womanist Ethics, Katie Cannon, that's like a canonical. That's like basic stuff about Black womanism. And Black Womanist Ethics, or Womanist Ethics and the Cultural Production of Evil. And so those are some of the places you can get more information. All of that's included in the PowerPoint that you can download. So now I'm going to turn it over to Shamika so she can talk a little bit about this notion of technology and womanism together.
Okay. So if you can't see this shirt, it says #Gamergate is hate. How many of you all know what Gamergate was? Awesome. Okay. That is good. Part of the reason why I started this thesis project was because I was at a social justice seminary where people were fired up about doing something about social justice work, and people didn't know what Gamergate was. And they were still learning about what Black Lives Matter was doing. So Gamergate happened back in 2014. Essentially, there were women in the tech and gaming industry who were getting vitriolic attacks on Twitter and other social media platforms because they were women in tech or women in gaming. And people like Anita Sarkeesian, Brianna Wu, and others were attacked in various ways. And so that spurred me to think about what we can do in the digital space and spaces in and around technology to stop these things from happening, to analyze what's going on in these spaces. And that's where I came up with Techno-Womanism. As you see here, the definition has 3 key elements to it. It says an interdisciplinary womanist theoretical approach to analyzing, understanding, and explaining the intersectional nature of the human experience within and outside of the digital space, as well as in and around technology. So the 3 main elements of that definition for me are interdisciplinary, intersectionality, and the digital space or technology. So interdisciplinary is really important because while we've laid the foundation for what womanism is as a theological and ethical framework that functions as the basis of techno-womanism, the scaffolding of techno-womanism is comprised of various perspectives ranging from critical race theory to feminist or gender or women's studies, as well as the social sciences such as sociology and humanities like history. By folding in these disciplines, we expand the tool set we have access to for analyzing, understanding, and explaining the phenomena that techno-womanism is acutely interested in. So then we turn our attention to the intersectionality. In 1989, Black feminist scholar Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term to encompass the reality of possessing multiple marginalized identities, such as being Black and a woman and queer, for example, which each come with their own discrimination and prejudice. The intersectional framework exposes how these different identities and their respective injustices are woven together. And then the next part that's important in this definition is the aspect of our identities that is folded into the digital space and technology. So we increasingly live our lives through a screen these days, and that life that we live is a life worth examining. And if that life that's being lived is one such as the lives that people like Brianna Wu and Anita Sarkeesian were living, it's one worth surviving and finding wholeness in and around. There's so much to learn about ourselves in the technosphere around us, and when you have a different lens with which to view, you can drastically alter what you can see. So what I would like to do now is to take...
I use a Mac. Sorry.
There we go. Lovely. Okay. So the example that I want to use in showing how you can use techno-womanism is the Black Lives Matter movement. So this is a movement that captures a small sample of continued state-sanctioned violence happening against Black bodies in the United States. Pictured here are Patrisse Cullors, Opal Tometi, and Alicia Garza, which are the 3 Black and queer female-identified creators of the Black Lives Matter movement hashtag, which was created on Facebook in the aftermath of the shooting of Trayvon Martin in 2012. So, to the far left, how many of you know who this individual is at the top? Raise your hands.
Good.
Yes. Good. So this is Michael Brown, hashtag hands up. And the call and response there is hands up. Hands up, don't shoot. Right. So the next gentleman there, Eric Garner. Who knows Eric Garner's story? Right? So his is I Can't Breathe. Just so that you know, Michael Brown was the gentleman who was gunned down in, help me. Ferguson, thank you. Gunned down in Ferguson, and there was no video of the incident, so people were on both sides of that situation, but with Eric Garner, there was video, and the only person that got indicted was the person who filmed the video. Yeah. And here we have Sandra Bland. Raise your hand if you know who this person is. Right. So you'll notice that there are less hands in the room that went up, but Sandra Bland was one of the women that was stopped at a traffic light by police. The next thing she knows, she's being arrested, and the next thing her family knows is she's dead. The gentleman here, the young boy, Tamir Rice, raise your hand if you've heard his story. More hands have gone up. The hashtag behind him is To Miss Rice, his mother. So what I want to note is there are so many stories like this, which is already tragic and unacceptable. But what's even more unacceptable on top of that are the stories of women like Sandra Bland who are lesser known in this conversation. So we start with the intersectionality here. being both Black, like these other individuals, but also a woman, has in some ways silenced her story and made it more invisible. And so that's what's unacceptable in these situations. In terms of interdisciplinary, when talking about Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter movement, we're bringing in things like critical race theory, sociology, socio-political conversations, as well as historical information. I want to bring up the scholar Nikita Carney in examining Black Lives Matter through the critical race theory and sociological analysis, argues that technological innovations lead to an increase in access to public discourse for most young people. She states, while violence against people of color in the United States has persisted in some form for hundreds of years, today we see youth of color fighting to control the national discourse about state-sanctioned violence in their communities in new ways through the use of social media. So even when Malcolm Gladwell wrote in the New Yorker in 2010 about an article called Small Change, that the revolution would not be tweeted, his use of comparative history brought the experiences and lessons from the civil rights movements in conversation with the Black Lives Matter movement, critiquing and elevating the latter. So the final piece here is talking about the social media and technology that are used here. So the hashtags that are created in these movements don't just stay in the blogosphere online in your social media platforms. They move to the streets, they move to the White House. Black Lives Matter movement is now a global movement with chapters all over the world. William Murphy Jr., a Baltimore lawyer and attorney to the family of Freddie Gray, who was killed in 2015 by a spinal injury sustained while in police custody, spoke at a press conference held in a house of worship. He said, "Thank God for cell phone video cameras." That was a call that Murphy made, praising a technology ubiquitous enough to be available to the ever marginalized in the U.S. And if you've looked at any of the Pew research around the adoption of technology, according to their research, 95% of people living in the United States today have a cell phone of some kind. And since 2011 to today, that number has gone from 35% to 77% of people owning a smartphone or a high-tech phone that has access to the internet and whatnot. So if you look at the numbers of people using social media platforms, even though Facebook is declining in these days, they did surpass over 2 billion users last year, where Instagram also surpassed 1 billion last year, and Twitter last month had 321 million monthly users. So whether it's a high-tech phone or an app, an instrumentalist view of technology stands in that the tech itself is not inherently good or evil, but it is instead a tool to be used or wielded. That being the case, it's up to the individual handling the technology to know how to use technology for good. By leveraging hashtags and social media platforms, the Black Lives Matter movement is certainly using tech for good. And then we end this example talking about how womanism comes into play. And I focus on the survival and the wholeness that the Black Lives Matter movement is folded into what they do. So the Black Lives Matter movement did not simply say we're going to work against the state-sanctioned violence that's occurring. We also want to celebrate what it means to be Black and to be a person of color and to be queer and to have all of these different kinds of identities. So their survival is not just living, it is going beyond that. And then the wholeness comes in with their perspective on seeking justice, not just for Black people, but justice for all, truly anyone who's experienced the injustices at these in these spheres they want to fight for as well. So that being the case, we have our final thoughts here, where social media and social justice meet in the symbol of a hashtag, but they don't, as I said, have to stay there. Hashtag continue to change the world, and our youth have witnessed and participated in such movements from Black Lives Matter to Me Too to Never Again. By learning how to embrace all the aspects of our identity and engaging as allies to those who are different than us in the digital space, we can all survive and be whole. We open up the floor for questions. I think we have a few minutes.
We have 10 minutes. So far, we're doing good. We're doing good. Very good. Questions, comments? Here. Any questions, comments? Techno-Womanism. Yes.
So I'll talk from the perspective of ISTE, and there's a standard. I don't know. ISTE is the International Society for Technology and Education. We work a lot in K-12, but also in higher ed, and it's using technology to learn.
Yeah.
But we also have standards, which is a misnomer, but it's a two-page framework for how to use technology with the purpose for learning. But we have a standard in all of our senses, the student, educator, education leader, around digital citizenship. And I look at these movements, and one of the, as we were, we have a huge public comment period. We had thousands of people weigh in as we were developing the standards. But when we started the student standards, one of the first, the goals that came up, that emerged from this process is how do we help students use technology for good, not for people, basically. And I look at those movements and I look at how powerful they are, and just wanting to know in terms of like analysis as a digital movement in addition to both in the analog world and in the digital world, is there models or like looking at impact, or do anybody doing studies on sort of the impact of those convergences of that in the world? I mean, we see a big impact just by the numbers.
Right.
I'm wondering if anybody's doing any studies around that.
So I know that there are studies being done around all of the movements. So, and the use of technology within the movement. So even with Arab Spring, there was a lot of technology use. That's the reason we had the impact Arab Spring had was technology helped push that forward. I think the same is being said about Black Lives Matter movement, but we can go all the way back to the Civil Rights movement and talk about how technology, different types of technology at the time were used to push forward the conversations about civil rights. So as far as research studies, I can't point you to any specifically right now that are about that. We could probably go out and find that information. But I do think that there's always been a conversation about how can we utilize the technology of the time to make a difference for social change and transformation. And it may not always land in the academic realm where they talk about impact, but I know the street value of Twitter and video cameras on the telephones is very high. And so when we start looking at those of us that are parts of social movement, it actually, technology then becomes one of the ways we push it forward and engage the rest of the world in the conversation forward. But I can't point to specific research studies right now.
Can you? I know that there's a prospective student who I talked to who was doing research of a hackerspace in Harlem, but that research is actively going on right now, so it's not yet published. But like Dr. Woodley said, there's a lot of people who are in this space doing the research around these movements and looking at how technology is influencing them. Like the New Yorker article that I mentioned about Malcolm Gladwell was written in 2010, and I think he would say something different today if he had to revisit that article.
And there are a few articles about the Arab Spring and the use of Twitter and the hashtag, and then how that was helped to how educators use that in order to help them to educate themselves and to help have that conversation with their students. So there are a couple of articles out there on
A
that.
few about Arab Spring, but that's older. An older sense of a movement. So now that's what happens with education, right? Relate to research, research and stuff more historically than in the moment. And so Arab Spring is a great example of that. There are even some brown power movements that use technology starting back in the 70s and 80s where there's research on that. But one of the most prolific, of course, is civil rights movement and how something that we don't even look at as advanced technology now, the television. The television advanced the civil rights movement in major ways. Just because the world could now see what was happening to people, blacks and other people that were conscious and moving forward civil rights, the world could see it now.
And there's also the technology of, I forget the name of the machine, but it was a copy machine that was used to, when they made the decision to do the Montgomery bus boycott, they made copies of the information that people needed to know, and they made those copies quickly overnight, passed them all out, disseminated them, so that people knew that the following morning what was going to go down. So, like you said, something as innocent now that we see as television or something like a copy machine, maybe a machine, yes. So these are technologies of the time, and we now have the technologies of our time. The technologies of tomorrow, machine learning, AI. These are the kinds of things that are going to be on the forefront of these movements.
And I just want to say this part. Part of the reason we even take on this conversation is because there is a feminist and a womanist perspective. Like the voices of women need to come forward and be heard with technology, in the teaching of technology, in the design of technology. Gamergate was all about how girls can't game. Like girls should be part of that. And so what we're going to do is squat them, or we're going to dox them, or we're going to do all of these things to keep girls and women in their place. And so it becomes an imperative, a moral imperative, that the voices of women be heard in technology and in social movements. Because even with the Black Lives Matter movement, you have to push. It was started by women, and you have to push forward that women get killed by police too. And so even the women's voices within the movement, like Black Lives Matter, get silenced around gender, and how important it is for us in technology to really push forward the importance of bringing marginalized voices to the forefront. And in a lot of respects in technology, it's not just racial, it's gender. Yes?
Yeah, for Shamika. So when you were just listing some technologies, you said artificial intelligence. And I have a concern there because artificial intelligence relies on algorithms.
Yes.
And algorithms are computed, right, they're biased. And so my concern is there's the potential that, pick the demographic, but you're talking about the intersectionality of women of color, which has the of color and the feminist piece to it.
Right.
And so my concern is with AI that based on the algorithm, it'll actually end up silencing some of these.
Well, we're already seeing that happen. I don't know if you all are familiar with the book Weapons of Mass Destruction by Kathy O'Neill, but she talks about the bias that's implicit in a lot of what she calls WMDs, Weapons of Mass Destruction. And they're algorithms and models that are like Compass, which was created to process people who have been convicted of crimes. And they ask questions like, have you experienced crimes in your neighborhood? Or do you know someone in your family who's been convicted of a crime? Well, if you're of a middle-class family or if you're of a particular demographic, those questions are going to separate you in a way that's different if you're poor, Black, and these kinds of things, living in certain kinds of communities. So that's already happening, to your point, in some ways. And I feel like there's so many threads to this conversation. Like, if we get more diversity in technology so that the technology is created with these things in mind, then we can have more equitable products and services that we use. But then also there's the creators and there's the consumers of technology. So if they're not creating it in a way that we want it to be, then the people who are consuming that technology can be empowered to use it in a way that is empowering. But that's where literacy comes from, like digital citizenry or other kinds of aspects that can equip young people and marginalized people to use technologies in ways that can get them what they're looking for.
Yeah. Right, so that brings me to my second point. So I'm a practitioner of ISTE standards, I know them well. And I'm also a teacher educator, and I'm also a literacy person, so I also prepare other pre-service teachers. And I guess my concern is, I don't really like the terms allies because I think it creates binary. If you're not an ally, so I'm not going to use that term. But I am an advocate. And with that said, my concern is we need to teach students these skills, right? But how do I think the work that needs to be done is aligning these skills in a way that works with the standards that we have to teach already in the schools, because that's where the accountability piece is. And so I think this creates some sort of dichotomy, because as a teacher, educator preparing teachers, there's a test,
Right.
and to do their job, and again, I'm an advocate of you all. So there's this rub, right?
Right.
There's this tension, and where I want to bring my ISTE standards into it, ISTE standards don't have to be on the lesson plan. Like NTPA doesn't care about ISTE, right? NTPA doesn't care about that. They care about that you can teach your content, and that's what I care about because that's what I get based on my CAPE accreditation. So I guess my more challenging question is, where do you all fit? Like, how does that work? How can I integrate you all into my work?
Well, I mean, I think it goes back to what we heard at the keynote, in that there's these hard skills that we have to learn, but there's also these soft skills and these social
Right.
capital that we have to help our students with. And just because there aren't standards that mandate us to do this, it's our responsibility to make sure that regardless of what our standards are, how are we making it so that in my former district, they talk about how equity is the plate upon which we do our work. You know, it's like it's what we do our work. Everything else stands on it, but what holds it all together is the work, is equity work. And so it doesn't matter what standards each and every single content subject matter teacher teaches. They have to still come at their subject through an equity lens. And so I think of it in teacher preparation, and that we have to have that lens in whatever standard we're trying to help our students meet. You know, like in how in TPA, it's about do they know their content, do they know how to teach? But at the same time, it's like their analysis of how they're teaching is we need to help them to filter it through not just one lens, but through a lens of social justice of how they're looking at what they're seeing. And so,
I think the difficulty is, so if you have a Black Lives Matter and then you get pushback. So you get social media and the history of that technology is going to work, and it brings freedom, etc. The Arab Spring, so you get pushback. So you get pushback now, let's say, against the Russians use Black Lives Matter as a kind of a counter in the election. Well, now it's about equity, as we talked about. So is it value for all people? Is it women first? Is it African Americans? Is it poverty? So you have all these priorities, and you're trying to teach your students what is more important, that the racism, the sexism, the poverty, and they all have values. So what standard do we need here?
So that's when we would introduce intersectionality.
Yes.
There is no one first. And it's a very Western way of being to start thinking, and that's part of where the standards get developed, is from a Western way of being and a Westernized standard about this is how we see it here, and this is how it needs to be, and this is how we're going to use education to indoctrinate the students or indoctrinate the children and the adults. And so what we would offer is exactly what you're saying about it being the foundation, that we stop and we come from an intersectional perspective that says there is no one more valid than the other. For example, I don't wake up in the morning and say, today I'm going to be a woman and not be Black. That's it. Or I don't wake up and say, today I am going to be Black and not a woman. I don't wake up and say, today I'm going to have a halfway decent paycheck or not, and that's all I'm going to be about is my economic status. It all comes together, so there is no justice for me unless there is racial, gender, SES justice. There is justice for all, and it's at the intersection of all those identities. There's not one that's privileged over the other. So part of what has to happen is these dialogues, like the one we're having today, introducing these ideas and concepts of intersectionality. How many of you heard of intersectionality before? Okay, great. Kimberly Crenshaw is somebody that you want to go and get to know because she talks about these exact things, that we need to stop privileging one over the other. We need to stop privileging standards over people's wholeness and over teachers' ability to teach. Which, I'm a social justice educator, so I'm more about making sure that teachers have what they need to teach the students that are in front of them and not just teaching to the standard. So I think conversations make a difference, and new concepts make it, and new languaging of things like intersectionality. What time is it? 2:50. Okay, so it's 2:50, we're already 5 minutes over. Thank you. Please feel free, please feel free to be in touch with us if you have any more questions or comments. Thank you all so much for coming out today, and enjoy the rest of the conference. We'll be around for a few minutes since nobody else is coming to kick us out.
Yes, and there's a book written by, I'm going to say her name wrong, but for those interested in Twitter and activism, it's called Twitter and Tear Gas by Zeynep Tufekci. Twitter and Tear Gas. Her name is Zeynep Tufekci. I recommend searching for Twitter and Tear Gas. The name of the book. But she also has a TED Talk as well.
Thank you, God.
That was my question too, with like using technology for good.
Yeah.
But that whole concept of slacktivism as well, and how it's easy to just like and retweet something, and now I've done my part for social justice.
Yeah.
How can we use that framework and what we
Thank you
do to
so
take
much.
it further, to have it materialize instead of like the ALS bucket challenge, for instance.
Right.
There were more people who put ice on their heads than there were dollars raised.
Thanks.
So, there's that whole piece to it too. Like, how do we combat that to go beyond? I mean, it's still the hashtags and all that stuff are still good, but how do we take it further so that it materializes into something, and it's not just that.
Well, what they did, Black Lives Matter, they went from those hashtags to an organization.
Right.
Thanks for
Right.
your comment. Write me. Email me.
I will.
Okay, good.
This was really good.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it's finding opportunities for manifestation of it.
Right.
So as people get connected in the real world, then there's the opportunity for a manifestation of it. But it's also remembering that just because people dump the ice bucket or do any of those things, it doesn't mean they're all committed. What you do is
Exactly.
focus
Exactly.
on but everybody doesn't
Yeah.
have to be committed.
Yeah.
And so you focus on those that are.
That are.
Yeah, strength based. All right, we're out of here.
Thank you.
Thank you.